This has been a nasty election.
Such a nasty one.
Grab them by the
The big issues were more or less lost in the daily drama.
protesters clashed with Trump supporters.
So we decided to set out on a cross-country road trip to talk to real people about real issues they're facing and try to get these two out of our heads for a bit. We're asking, what now, America?
Climate change is destroying this island off the coast of Virginia. Tangier Island is rapidly disappearing under rising sea levels, losing ground every year. In just a few decades, the whole island could be underwater.
It can be depressing up here when you see these places that used to be a thriving community, and it's all gone now.
When we hear about islands going under rising sea levels, we often hear about the South Pacific, about the Maldive Islands. What we don't hear about so often is this island, even though it's just a few miles off of the mainland U.S.
In the past 150 years, Tangier has wasted away to just 1/3 of its previous size. And the 500 or so people who live here know time is running out.
I mean, I've seen 75 feet from last October to now be washed away from upwards. We can't handle it any longer.
When this green beacon was put here in the 60s, you could step off that onto the land.
You could step off of this beacon right here.
Yep, on that land. It was all the way over here then.
How long before Tangier Island is not habitable?
We've got about maybe 50 years at the mid-range. And if the high-level sea level rise scenario is what happens, at most they've got 25 years. So they don't have a lot of time.
David Schulte has studied Tangier for 15 years. His proposal to literally lift the island through engineering might be the only way to save it. But that requires funding from a Congress that doesn't even acknowledge the root of the problem.
You know, how long will it take for the sea level to rise 2 feet? I mean, think about it. If your ice cube melts in your glass, it doesn't overflow.
We're the only first world country where this is even a debate. Everyone else is on board with climate change, is a real thing that's occurring.
These guys have a ticket to New York City. These are peeler crabs. A peeler crab is a blue crab that's getting ready to molt or shed.
And this is how a lot of people on the island make their living, isn't it?
Yeah, I would say it's almost 50-50. Part of the guys catch the hard crabs and sell them like by the bushel basket, and then the other guys do the soft crabs. Crabs are they're what keeps the ball rolling here. Can be very, very discouraging. The bay that's provided the living for everybody, all these years is actually threatening the community now.
Tangier Island is a historical treasure. John Smith was the first European to come across it. Later in the 1600s, it was founded by several families, among them the Parks, the Pruitts, and the Crockett's, each of which still live on the island.
This is eroding very quickly too, right here.
It's coming in right into their backyard.
Yep. As a matter of fact, I live here. The one with the black roof.
How much closer is it now than it was maybe 10 years ago or 20 years ago?
Oh, I'd say 10 or 20 years ago, 50 feet.
Today, Tangier Island is only a sliver of what it once was. Maps collected by the Army Corps of Engineers shows the rapid loss of land since 1850. As the north half, known as Upwards, wasted away completely, new canals, creeks, and swamps crisscrossed the island, and the west side of Tangier was steadily swallowed by the ocean until the island's residents made a drastic move.
It looks simple. This seawall is actually the most effective means of stopping that erosion that's been eating away at Tangier Island. But it only stretches along the west shore of the island right now. Expanding it to other parts of Tangier Island would be a big project and a much more expensive one.
They completed this one in 1989. Haven't lost 1 inch of shoreline since then. And then we need protection on the east side now. I mean, the erosion's going on all around.
But the seawall alone won't be enough.
You really need an effort to raise the remaining land. And, engineeringly you can do that, but you would definitely have to do that in addition to, like you suggested, the stone protection, the seawall sort of thing. Otherwise, if you don't, you're just going to get kind of a fishbowl effect where you're going to have the stone around the island, but any storm event is just going to overtop them and just flood the entire interior.
Today, this is Tangier's problem. But tomorrow, it's a problem for America's entire eastern seaboard. Among the places set to flood under rising sea levels in this century are Miami, Lower Manhattan, the Jersey Shore, and even where we interviewed David Schulte in Norfolk, Virginia. To save themselves, governments here and the federal government will have to acknowledge and address the problem of climate change and rising sea levels. And the country will have to make a decision as to which Americans should be saved.
If we go by this criteria, what we're going to end up doing is saving all the big cities, because as a locality, they're going to be able to come up with, say, their local share to do a big engineering project. Whereas all the little towns, like the Tangiers, these small towns are not going to be able to come up with their share to do these big projects. So going by that criteria, we're just going to basically abandon every less than big city entity, in these areas. So I think at the end of the day, we're going to have to use more than that as our decision-making criteria.
They're probably going to get the help faster because of the number of people that, live there and vacation there. So I'm sure there'll be more focus there, but we're in need of help from the government, and we think they should, help us out.
It's an epidemic. I mean, it's beyond epidemic proportions. Al-Qaeda might as well have moved in and taken over. It's that bad.
What we've done for the last 40 years is not working.
This is Huntington, West Virginia. When the war on drugs failed, this town was one of its casualties.
Dispatch to all companies responding. This is going to be a cardiac arrest now. We've got 2 patients. One is not breathing.
Okay, so this is probably not good.
Huntington fire.
They're stabilizing her and getting her in the ambulance.
And a lot of these auto accidents are caused by opioids or drugs.
Well, probably 60% or more of the DUIs are actually heroin and not alcohol.
The driver told troopers he had an addiction to prescription opioids and that he'd received an injection earlier that day.
Here's how serious the heroin epidemic is in Huntington. While the national overdose rate stands at 13 people in 100,000, West Virginia's rate is almost 3 times that, the highest for any state in the nation. This county's rate doubles that, and the rate for overdose deaths in Huntington itself, about 9 times the national average. On August 15th, the problem came to a head. 28 overdoses in just 4 hours.
We have an unknown problem. So there's people there, they're just showing up and dying. I just caught a bit of that stuff. What are people showing up and doing? All they could tell us was that people are showing up and dying.
Nothing would be more effective than for Americans simply to quit using illegal drugs.
Do you think the old drug war failed Huntington?
The drug war failed this country.
Jim Johnson is Huntington's drug czar. He was the chief of police, he ran the jail, and now he has this to say.
If you would have told me, 3 or 4 years ago that I would be a proponent of drug courts and harm reduction programs, syringe exchanges, there was no way that I would have been. I would have thought those were the type of things that enabled. But I've come to understand what enabling is when you know families and people that have had drug problems and you didn't say anything and then you carried their casket. That's enabling.
Today, Huntington is fighting a new kind of drug war, at least new to West Virginia. And it's based on the idea that addiction is a disease to be treated, not just a crime to be punished.
3 days. It's the last time you'll see me.
That's awesome.
Yes, ma'am. Didn't do my first drug until I was 26, and I got a kidney stone here, and they put me on Oxycontin 80s, and kept me on them for 9 months for 1 kidney stone.
And how about a tie?
Yeah, give me a couple of them if you can. I'm down from using 2 to 3 grams a day to less than half a gram a day.
That's awesome.
Getting clean's easy as hell. That's not an issue. Staying clean is the hard part.
Whether this will work, they don't know yet. But Huntington has already become a model across the state for a more compassionate approach to drug sentencing in drug court.
All right, let's start with Bethana.
Okay. She seems to be remorseful for what she's done. She seems to say, she's sorry, she wants to get back on track, she's having a rough day,
We have a treatment team of people who sit and talk about their cases before drug court to see how they're doing, what we can do to improve their situation.
And while there's been a boom in heroin overdoses in West Virginia, there's also been a boom in places like this. Centers for Recovery that work with health and city officials to take a softer approach in treating addiction.
Folks sometimes ask, they'll say, well, hey, how's business? And it's almost a bittersweet moment because yes, we're continuing to expand, but at the same time, you always dream of a day to where these type of services are no longer needed.
A lot of my friends died. I know about 15 of them died shooting heroin, it's really bad. I don't want to take that chance putting another needle in my arm.
But right now, the heroin epidemic here is not getting better, and Huntington is preparing for even darker days.
This problem is going to still get worse. We have not peaked out yet, and we don't have an answer. We don't have a solution.
After a tornado destroyed this small town, it rebuilt on a 100% clean energy plan.
All of our pioneering ancestors were the original green people. They drilled a water well when they settled here. They used the wind to pump the water out of the ground.
In 2007, Greensburg, Kansas was forced to start again, and they started on a green energy grid. Today, they produce more energy put onto that grid than they take off of it.
May the 4th, 2007, 95% of the community was leveled by an EF5 tornado. It left us all homeless. My wife and I were in the basement, and it sucked the house right off the top of us.
We knew it was going to get close. We didn't know it was going to hit. My younger daughter, my wife, and myself were in the basement.
When that tornado hit Greensburg, about half of the town's 1,500 residents moved out. Those who stayed, including Mayor Bob Dixon, made a choice to try something new, despite the politics around it.
Green to me in my generation in rural America was 1967, powder blue bell-bottom pants, double knit with a tie-dyed shirt, possibly on some mind-altering substances, hugging a tree. That's what green was, because we played political football with the environment since then.
Energy here, it's put onto the grid, and then from there it's disseminated throughout the regional pool.
Right, so the 23 member cities of our Kansas Power Pool share in the energy that's produced here.
And by harnessing the wind, Greensburg produces even more energy than it consumes. It runs a wind farm south of town, while businesses and the K-12 school operate turbines of their own. And many buildings are designed to save energy and maximize clean energy.
We use the turbines around here to help generate electricity. It helps our electricity bill, I'd say probably by half.
You can see the lights aren't even on in this room because they don't need to be. We have plenty of light in here, just daylight.
We have a windmill out here that we utilize. It's more efficient, and we try to explain how that works in class, and we try to incorporate that into our classes as well.
Post-recession, many parts of Kansas have struggled along with the rest of rural America. But with Google and Kansas City putting money into clean energy, the sector holds the promise of new jobs. Is Kansas just a better place to collect wind energy?
The upflow on the elevation from Oklahoma into south central Kansas is some of the best consistent year-round wind in the United States. My dad and granddad always said, leave it better than you found it. It didn't matter if you were cleaning up your room or you were talking the environment, you just leave it better than you found it.
We should be treated like other legal licensed businesses.
Legalization would have a tremendous impact. That said, banks are not going to jump in bed with cannabis.
In 2016, a handful of states are considering making recreational marijuana legal, but it's still illegal at a federal level, which means businesses like this one in Colorado that want to sell cannabis still have a lot of barriers in the way. From the very beginning of the growing process, Colorado cannabis plants are highly regulated. Tim Cullen is the CEO of Colorado Harvest Company, and he showed us around his grow facility.
As you look at these plants here in front of us, you see that there are different colored tags on these plants. There are blue tags that are recreational plants, and there are yellow tags that are medical plants. There are radio frequency ID tags. They have barcodes and tracking information on them, and they're registered to this company. And so every plant has a tag on it, and it's these barcodes that are updated for anything that's watered in or sprayed onto these plants.
The tags are part of a state tracking system called Metric. Since 2013, Colorado has been using this system to track millions of plants to make sure cannabis companies are following all the laws.
Every night the store has to do what's called a Metric upload, where we upload all of our inventory sales that day, and it updates Metric, and then the state knows where all the product is at any given time.
So that's really highly regulated, but then...
Right, until you get to the banking side. So people do pay with cash.
Back at Cullen's dispensary, consumers have to pay in cash. In fact, the entire industry deals primarily in cash, which is harder to track.
Consumers are not allowed to use their debit cards or credit cards to purchase marijuana.
The system is a result of banks being wary of working with an industry that is still technically illegal on the federal level.
Until about 18 months ago, it was really iffy as to whether or not you could have a bank account. We had 14 accounts shut down in a couple year period, and at one point ended up with no bank account at all. It might sound like a fun reality TV show to have lots and lots and lots of cash around, but in reality it's not fun at all. It means that we're hiring armed guards, we're keeping money in safes, and we're paying people with guns to sit there and watch it. We want banking.
Now, small banks in Colorado are starting to work with the cannabis industry. But that doesn't solve every problem. Lamine Zarad is a former bank regulator and now the CEO of Token, a startup that's hoping to give cannabis companies a way to track their transactions as closely as they track their plants, by recording those transactions using blockchain technology.
If you are going to keep these individuals outside of banking, they are forced to operate in cash, and if they are forced to operate in cash, they're a lot more high risk. Cannabis, in my opinion, could do one of two things. It could either harm a bank, as an industry, it can harm banking because they don't know how to deal with it, and they essentially force these law-abiding citizens to operate in a quasi-legal state. Or they can embrace it and try to analyze risk, but trying to understand these novelties that are sort of brought by this new industry.
Of course, legalizing recreational marijuana nationwide is high on the marijuana industry's wish list.
We should be treated like other legal licensed businesses.
But Zarad says that won't solve everything.
Prohibition on alcohol ended 82 years ago, and liquor stores are still considered high risk by most financial institutions. Cannabis has another 100 years or so before its stigma wears off, and banks are going to freely open their arms and accept those dispensaries and growers and extractors as relationships.
We do know the deaths are going up. People from Central America and Mexico looking for some relief from the terrible violence and poverty that they're suffering.
The need is there, the need to support their families and to get away from the violence in their countries.
We're at the U.S.-Mexico border, and in this area along the southwest border, 240 people died last year crossing from Mexico into the U.S. There's something strange happening at the U.S.-Mexico border. U.S. Border Patrol is seeing and apprehending fewer people crossing illegally into the country. But at the same time, the number of migrants dying at the border has remained steady.
higher now than it was in the late 1990s.
So this looks like the real water drop. There's a good chance it was used by people walking through here.
Tucson Samaritans is one of several groups that drops water, food, and other aid on the trails migrants take into the U.S.
The fences tend to end when the going gets tough. People are forced to do more dangerous and desperate things, take different routes.
This is one of the spots where aid groups drop water and supplies for migrants coming across the border. We're up here in the mountains. You can't build a wall here, and this is an area where the Border Patrol might not find a lot of migrants who are crossing through into the U.S. We're seeing fewer people crossing the border, but more deaths.
The amount of deaths has not really diminished. I mean, it goes up and down a few numbers, not no.
Why is it held steady like that while fewer people have been coming?
Because of the more dangerous areas where they're crossing through. The areas are, you know, I mean, as you can see through here, it's very rocky, very slippery in some areas. People are walking through that have no idea of the terrain that they're going to be traveling through.
Hiking even a few hundred feet of these trails is not easy. And then you consider the fact that the migrants who cross through here have another 40 miles or so to go before they get to a safe place. What's the group's relationship with Homeland Security? Do they not like you guys being out here?
Generally, we have a cordial relationship with the individual agents. Of course, we're at cross purposes with their mission, but we're just providing basic humanitarian aid. We're going to keep doing what we do. One of our friends from Samaritans has been putting out these crosses all over the desert, commemorating the places where people have died. The other day he told me he's got almost 400 out now. They're all over the place.
We made it to California!
Finally here, we've driven across the country. We started in Washington, D.C. We're now at the Santa Monica Boardwalk.
We put 4,000 miles on that minivan that we have spent the last 3 weeks in, and we're finally here.
Now let's enjoy our time on the other side of the country from Washington before we are forced back to reality.
Sounds good.